Hello again. So I wanted to address a couple of points that that have been raised for a while, really. They keep coming up, and I wanted to clarify what I thought about these things, and then you can tell me what you think, as usual. So the first point that I wanted to clarify is the following: when I say that we need to respect people's narrative, and so that if people want to talk about themselves, defining their experience as whatever, a spiritual journey, a consequence of processes of discrimination, like sexism or racism, and a natural reaction to those processes, or if they want to define their experience as a mental illness. What Let's say we need to respect all of these narratives and we need to help people. So, first of all, it's not true that I just think that we should just accept anything the person says. We need to engage in a conversation and in a relational process where we're trying to understand this better together. But the narrative is not imposed. So I'm not giving the person the truth as a professional. I'm helping the person find their own truth. But I wanted to clarify now is a lot of people say, well, really you say this, but what this means is that the medical model wins anyway, because it's not a free choice to define your experience illness or not. There's a lot of societal pressures to call your experience a mental illness, a disorder, etc. So if you give freedom, basically what it means is that they will all define their experience as an illness. Now, the problem that I have with that, and why this leaves me quite unimpressed as an argument, is that I've been saying for a long time that the central issue is not really what terms people prefer. The central issue is the institutional power. So what they're basically, without knowing it, saying that I'm right. So saying that there is an institutional structure that pushes a narrative. And if you want to undermine it, you need to act on different levels. And that's what I've been trying to say. So it's not just that you provide people with the freedom to come up to be, well, it's not just the freedom to come up with their own narrative, as I said. It's not, but you help them actively as a professional find their own narrative. But it's not just that, it's the fact that you have a different type of institutional structure which is much less focused on presenting let's say fulfilling the needs of a structure, but it's much more focused on the people. So less or no locked doors, undermining, overturning and destroying violent institutions. So all of the logic of saying, you need to take your meds, otherwise they'll be sectioned, that doesn't apply if you're not locking people up and restraining them, and you move away from the mental hospital. We need a system that is more connected, where you don't get a referral to get treatment for this bit of the person or that bit of the person. You have a holistic approach focused on the person. So you move from a diagnostic understanding of problems to a whole person project on people. My experience is that in Trieste, very few identify as having a mental illness. I know one person that kind of is quite open about their experience of bipolar disorder, and many other people. There was an episode on the podcast that you can check where we talked about diagnosis, and other people, including myself, just are not interested. Neither I was a service user and I was never interested in a diagnosis or in calling my experience an illness or not. So when you really undermine the institutional structure, it's not true that everybody will define their experience an illness. That's just not a fact. But of course, the focus of the British debate is just on this issue: how do you call experience mental illness, or with a diagnosis, or with ptmf or whatever else. I think the issue is much broader. I'm not saying that the solution to all the system's problems is telling people call it whatever you want. I'm trying to go beyond this obstacle, this point that I think is secondary. It's important that people are imposing a narrative, as they are, to discuss they shouldn't. But the real issue is the institutional structure, the fact that there is a dominant narrative So it's not that I would just concede that, that the medical model could be in charge as long as people can have a freedom of defining their experience in whichever way they want. There are many ways, and I've been trying to just talk about it while we're talking about this rather secondary issue, I think. There are many ways in which you can undermine the institutional structure. But the fact that that I have my experience of triage clear doesn't really matter. So that kind of annoys me because people kind of dismiss my views without addressing them. And that's one thing that I wanted to say. Second, connected to other discussions that I've been having, that second issue that keeps coming up, this idea that supposedly I think that the power threat meaning framework imposes a narrative. I never thought that the power threat meaning framework imposes a narrative. And so if you think that's not true, I agree with you that it's not true. What I disagree with is the vision that the broader movement that I think we could call Drop the Disorder, what that movement has sees as the role of ptmf in the system. And so all the talk about paradigm shift, and particularly talk about dropping the language of disorder from the system and considering that language pathologizing and wrong, regardless of whether it's imposed or not. I agree that it's pathologizing and wrong to impose a narrative, but I don't agree that intrinsically the language of disorder is pathologizing and wrong. Now, if you think that it is, and you're a professional, you're talking to somebody in crisis, of course the person in crisis, even if they think they're struggling with an eating disorder, if they want help and they know that the system doesn't think so badly of the language of disorder, they will try to adapt to your language. But that's to fulfill your needs, not the needs of the person. So that is still a perspective of care that's based on an institutional structure. It's absurd to connect with what I just said in the first point. It's absurd to think that you can think that somebody calling their experience an eating disorder is pathologizing and wrong, but you say, but I respect it very much. Because there's a huge gulf between you as a professional and the patient. If you think that, the patient is not going to have much freedom. The patient is going to fulfill your narrative. And I don't like this. I think that there's all sorts of negative issues that can come out of this, and we can talk about it if you want. But yes, I would like people, if you want to, I don't have any problem discussing my ideas and disagreeing with people, but let's talk about what our disagreements are. Let's not talk about assumptions about what my ideas are or distortions of what my idea is. I fully endorse ptmf as an option. If we exclude all of the drop the disorder rhetoric and pathologizing and wrong, etc., and we accept that there are different ways to define pain patterns which aren't intrinsically external or internal to a person. They're a bit of both, a bit of everything. There are different ways in which you can simplify reality to act on it. You can think that you can see problems as I'm fighting back against the challenge of sexism and racism. You can think, that like the SPK, I always say, the German movement used to think, they still do, that mental illness is a result of capitalism and a weapon against capitalism. You can think, there's many different conceptualizations of illness or non-illness. If the more languages there are, the better. Although I still don't think that it's the system that needs to find what languages are allowed or possible. It's the person that needs to find their own narrative. So we can discuss these things, but let's discuss what I actually believe in. And hopefully one day ptmf will decide, supporters will decide what they believe in, because I think we're still struggling to pinpoint one view or one perspective that doesn't change every time we have a conversation. Please again, I know I'm saying this often because it happens often. Please don't say that ptmf is in line with the Trieste model if you've read nothing about the Trieste model and you don't know about the theory, you don't know the story of it, you don't know anything about it, because that is very dismissive. If somebody from another culture came to you and said, oh, I have my movement. Yes, 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 it says everything that ptmf says. And you say, do you know anything about ptmf? Oh, no, I don't know anything, but yeah, it's the same. We already know. That appears as very dismissive. And so why is there this defensiveness? Let's have a conversation. Anyway, thank you. Bye-bye.